As a quick intro, Reed Hastings is widely known within the Valley as being one of the most principled, purposeful, rigorous in his analysis and intelligence about being a founder and being a CEO. He gets requests all the time to join people's boards, including mine, 8 years ago or whatever that was, which he was like, yeah, I'm focused on education, go away, which is a, part of focus is one of the things that makes Reed unusually strong. So we are extraordinarily lucky to have him with us here today. I think what I will open with is another piece of something where you are famous for, which is the Netflix culture and the culture deck. And how did the first culture deck end up coming about, getting published? Right, there's version 2, which we'll get to, but what led to that creation of that deck, the publication of it? What was that as an act of management, thought leadership?
It's wasn't a pre-read, so there's no pressure on it, but how many people have already read it? So I said kind of Netflix culture deck. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So about 8 years ago, we were getting tired of new employees joining, and I would meet with all the new employees and go through this 100-page slide deck. And 2 out of 3 really got it and understood, and their managers had properly described to them Netflix. And 1 out of 3 were in shock because the deck has some aggressive statements like adequate performance gets a generous severance package. And we're a team, not a family. And so if you know that going in, you can love it. But if you don't know it and you didn't expect it, you feel bait and switched. And so the big driver was we realized every candidate should get it. And then, of course, if every candidate's going to get it, it's going to be public. So let's just make it public.
And was the construction of it a way to essentially, as you're doing scale, to kind of keep a cultural norm as you scaled? Was that one of the central tools for doing that?
Yes. I wouldn't quite say keep a cultural norm, but it was to share and debate. One of the great things about putting things in writing is that it makes it more debatable. And so it's not just hearing a sermon and it's like, okay, that's nice, but you can comment on, this part here that we wrote down doesn't really seem appropriate or doesn't seem what we do, or, to some degree, it's a bill of rights for employees, which is here's a set of things that we, the company, want to and aspire to operate by. And if we don't, you can call us on it, and then we'll either fix the articulation because it's too easy to misunderstand, or live up to what we want to. So in some ways it's aspirational. And then by putting it in writing, which probably started 5 years before that, it allows all the people in the company to collaborate on it and to suggest improvements.
And what other things do you do to keep a healthy culture at scale? What are the other kind of techniques in addition to the deck, addition to the onboarding?
Yeah, I would say in our first couple of years, so we're founded about 20 years ago in 97 to when we went public in 2002, all we were concerned with is not going bankrupt. Because the first big internet recession was 2001, and so we had built up a big expense rate and contingent on future financing, and NASDAQ fell 75% that year, and all the venture capitalists felt over-leveraged. They were barely going to be able to support their existing investments. Certainly no one wanted to take on new ones. And so while the year before, in 2000, to raise money was as easy as taking a tin can and shaking it. And, $50 million would show up in the can. It was incredible. Never seen anything like it until last year. And then the following year, after the crash, you take your tin can out and shake it, and someone would steal the can. And so it was an enormously sharp and short change, which is why you see so much talk today about bubble, is the memory of, no one cares about the bubble, they care about the fall. So suddenly we didn't have enough money. We had to lay off a third of the company in 2001. And we eked into profitability and survived. But until that point, we really spent all the time just on how are we going to get the business to be we were DVD by mail at the time. So it's how is it going to be profitable? And only after 2002 we realized, wow, we're going to survive. That we started to think, well, it'd be awful to not want to work here. So we should try to figure out what cultural attributes were there of what we wanted to work in. We didn't set out to try to say, like, what's the most theoretically efficient culture? What's the, and in some abstract sense, it was literally about us. And we realized that what we valued most, even more than success, was working with really talented people in a productive way. That joy of excellence was incredible. And of course, if you can get that joy of people excellence and talent density, then you're very likely to win. So, they come together. But at the core, it was about having dense talent. And part of it was, after we did this 1/3 layoff, it was 120 people to 80. We had expected to basically grind to a halt and really not be able to make any improvements because it would take 80 people just to keep the lights on. But in fact, we got more done with only 80 people. And we tried to figure out why, and we realized now there was no dummy proofing necessary. And so it was just everybody was going fast and everything was right. And so we realized with the right density of talent, there's very little process needed, and that was the joyful thing. So at first we said, well, let's do a 1/3 layoff every year. That was the key. And
that's a long-term winning strategy.
That's a long-term winning. It might be, back to the blitzscaling thing. So, and then we realized, no.
Blitz shrinking. We're going to now add
blitz
that.
shrinking. Well, you want your gross ads to be,
Yes.
100%,
Yes.
and your net ads are less. But talent density matters so much. So then we figured, no, let's not do a layoff every year like that. Let's just do continued focus. And the big evolution we came to is for managers, they have to each year testify for each of their people that if that person were trying to quit, they would try to change their mind. And so it's up to the manager to decide, yes, I would want to change their mind, but sometimes you find that you have people working for you, and if they quit, you'd be like, oh, that's pretty good. And that's the case we wanted to proactively, not wait for them to quit, but proactively give them a generous severance package.
Yep, and that's how it got into the culture deck. And what, in addition to kind of performance, because this is actually, I'm to some degree leading the witness on this, or leading the question, but what were the key things about establishing that culture which enabled you to scale? Because this is the highly aligned, loosely coupled part of your version 2 of the deck.
So I think when we went public, we were 150 people by then. People worried internally. Now that we're public, everything's going to go to shit. And because so many companies had done that, put in a lot of process, be very cautious, et cetera. And we've made great progress really every year of pushing back on that and doing something either symbolic or real that increased employee freedom, essentially incented more variance in what we're doing. And we realized if we're going to run really loose, like very little rules, then you do want to set a broad context. So we set context, and this is what Reed's referring to, which is we added essentially a chapter to our slide deck, which is context, not control. And so we try to get managers to inspire and lead people rather than micromanage them. And they inspire and lead them through setting the context. What are we trying to do? What are the constraints? Is it a really big problem or a little problem? Must be done right, or we do an approximate version and fix later. There's a lot of context to any problem area. And if you get good at setting context, then you don't have to direct the micro specifics. But it's an art. So there's context about the problem, and then there's context about behavior, which is really the culture, which is what are the behavioral norms in terms of honesty and sharing and forthrightness.